Captain Lee Jun stared at his computer screen, unable to believe what he was seeing. The numbers didn't make sense. They couldn't be real. New Eden Colony had simply vanished. 2.5 million people had been living there just yesterday. Now there was nothing. "Sir, the radiation readings are off the charts," Lieutenant Park Nari said, trying to keep her voice steady. Her hands shook as she read the data. "Someone bombed the entire planet from space. There's nobody left alive down there." The command bridge of their ship, the Harmony's Edge, became completely silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Through the main window, they could see what used to be New Eden's biggest city. Now it was just black smoke rising into a grey sky. The beautiful blue and green planet that had grown food for 3 different star systems was now a ball of melted rock and ash. Lee Jun had been a space captain for 20 years. He had seen pirates attack merchant ships. He had witnessed space, battles between rival corporations, but he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't war, this wasn't even murder. This was something else entirely. 3 days later, Fleet Admiral Kim Tae stepped off his shuttle onto what used to be New Eden's surface. His boots made a crunching sound as he walked across soil that had been turned into glass by the intense heat. Everything was gone. The farms that had fed millions of people across 3 star systems were now just flat, empty wasteland stretching to the horizon. Kim Tae had brought a team of investigators with him. They spread out across the ruins, looking for any clue about who had done this terrible thing. Commander Yoon Hana, one of his best officers, was checking what used to be a children's playground in the main city. The swings and slides had melted into twisted metal shapes. "Admiral," Yoon Hana called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at this." She was kneeling next to what had once been a small school. The building was completely destroyed, but she could still see the outline of where children's desks had been. Kim Tae walked over and knelt beside her. "They didn't just want to kill everyone," Yoon Hana said, tears running down her face. "They wanted to erase us, to make it like we never existed at all." Kim Tae nodded grimly. Whoever had done this hadn't been interested in taking prisoners or stealing resources. They hadn't demanded money or territory. They had simply decided that humans shouldn't exist on this planet, and they had made it happen. The investigation team worked for hours, but they found no survivors. Not a single person had escaped. The attack had been so sudden and so complete that nobody had even had time to send a distress signal. One moment, New Eden had been home to millions of families. The next moment, it was a dead rock floating in space. Back on Earth, the news spread quickly through human space. Every human colony, every space station, every ship heard about what had happened to New Eden. People were scared. If someone could destroy an entire planet so easily, what was to stop them from doing it again? The Galactic Council, which was supposed to keep peace between different alien species, held an emergency meeting. Representatives from dozens of different worlds gathered to discuss the situation. The Zilarian ambassador, a tall alien with blue skin, stood up and gave a speech about how sorry his people were for humanity's loss. The Thaxian Collective, a group of insect-like aliens who controlled several star systems, sent a message saying that this was just what happened when species expanded too quickly into dangerous parts of the galaxy. They suggested that humans should accept this attack as a warning and stop trying to build new colonies. Most of the other alien species nodded their heads and agreed. They had seen this kind of thing before. Some unknown enemy would attack a smaller species, and that species would file complaints and make angry speeches at the Galactic Council. Then, after a few months, everyone would forget about it and things would go back to normal. The alien representatives expected humans to follow the same pattern. They thought human leaders would give sad speeches about the tragedy, maybe impose some trade sanctions and eventually just accept that New Eden was gone forever. After all, what else could humans do? Everyone knew that humans were a relatively new species in the galaxy, with only a few thousand ships and a handful of colonies. But as the alien diplomats made their speeches and offered their empty sympathy, none of them knew about the secret meetings happening in underground facilities across human space. They didn't know about the coded messages being sent between Earth and distant human outposts. They had no idea that deep beneath Earth's surface, systems that had been sleeping for decades were slowly waking up. The galaxy was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this day for a very long time, and when humanity finally responded to the destruction of New Eden, it would be a response that nobody would ever forget. Miles beneath the snow-covered peaks of the Himalayan mountains, something that had been sleeping for 30 years was finally waking up. Admiral Han Solo stood in front of a massive metal door that looked like it belonged in a bank vault. She pressed her hand against a glowing scanner, and after a few seconds, red lights began flashing throughout the underground tunnel. Identity confirmed. Admiral Han Solo authorization accepted, a computer voice said in perfect Korean. Directive 770 is now active, beginning Sleeper Fleet activation sequence. The enormous blast doors, each one weighing several tons, slowly began to open with a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the mountain. Solo had been waiting for this moment her entire career, but she had always hoped it would never come. Now, with New Eden destroyed and millions of innocent people dead, there was no choice left. As she walked through the opening doors, Solo entered a world that most humans didn't even know existed. The corridor stretched ahead of her for what looked like miles, carved directly into the solid rock of the mountain. Bright lights automatically turned on as she walked, revealing tunnels that were wide enough for trucks to drive through. But this wasn't just a tunnel. This was the entrance to humanity's biggest secret. After walking for several minutes, Solo reached an observation deck that overlooked the most incredible sight in human space. Spread out below her was an underground harbor so massive that she could barely see the other side. Thousands upon thousands of warships hung suspended in mechanical arms, their sleek metal hulls reflecting the artificial sunlight that lit up the enormous cavern. These weren't the small patrol ships that other alien species had seen humans flying. Around the galaxy, these were real warships, each one bigger than a city block and armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. And there were so many of them that Solo couldn't even count them all. "Incredible, isn't it?" said a voice behind her. Solo turned to see General Oh Min-ho walking up to join her on the observation deck. He was an old friend who had helped plan this facility decades ago. "Sometimes I come down here just to remind myself that it's all real." "How many ships are in this facility alone?" Solo asked, even though she already knew the answer. 15,000 combat vessels, Minho replied. "And this is just one of 47 facilities scattered across human space. In total, we have 700,000 warships ready for combat." Solo nodded slowly. For the past 200 years, while humans had been exploring the galaxy and building peaceful colonies, they had also been secretly preparing for war. Every time humans established a new colony, they also built hidden military bases. Every trade route included secret supply depots for the fleet that nobody knew existed. The galaxy thought humans were weak because they only ever saw humanity's civilian ships and small defense forces. What they didn't know was that for every merchant vessel flying through space, there were dozens of military ships hidden away, waiting for the day they might be needed. "I always hoped we would never have to use them," Minho said quietly, looking out at the massive fleet. "When we started building these ships, it was just a precaution. Insurance, you might say. We thought that if we were strong enough, nobody would ever dare attack us." "The children on New Eden thought they were safe too," Solo replied, her voice growing cold and hard. "They thought that because humans were peaceful, nobody would hurt them. Now 2.5 million of our people are dead." She turned away from the observation deck and walked over to a communication console. Her fingers moved quickly across the controls, entering codes that had been kept secret for decades. One by one, status lights began turning green as secure. Channels opened to hidden facilities across human space. "This is Admiral Han Solo," she said into the microphone. "Authorization code 770 is confirmed. Begin immediate activation of all Sleeper Fleet assets. This is not a drill." Across the galaxy, in dozens of secret locations, similar scenes were playing out. On the dark side of Earth's moon, massive doors opened in what looked like empty craters, revealing ship hangars that stretched deep underground. Beneath the ice caps of Mars, automated systems began warming up engines that had been cold for decades. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, what looked like ordinary rock suddenly split open, revealing hollow centers filled with warships. Space stations that seemed to be simple mining outposts transformed into military command centers. Even some of humanity's peaceful colonies had hidden military facilities buried beneath their cities. The activation process would take several weeks to complete. 700,000 warships couldn't be made ready for combat overnight. Each ship needed to be checked, fueled, armed, and crewed. Millions of military personnel who had been living normal civilian lives received coded messages telling them to report to secret facilities immediately. But the most important part of the activation wasn't the ships or the weapons. It was the message that humanity was finally ready to send to whoever had destroyed New Eden. For 2 centuries, humans had been building this fleet with one purpose in mind: to make sure that nobody would ever again think that humanity was weak or defenseless. The aliens who had destroyed New Eden thought they were sending a message of their own. They thought they were showing the galaxy that humans could be killed easily and that nobody would do anything about it. They were about to learn how wrong they were. As Solai watched the first ships in the underground harbor begin to power up their engines, she smiled grimly. The galaxy was about to discover what humans were really capable of when someone hurt their families. Intelligence Officer Choi Yunji had been working non-stop for 3 weeks, gathering every piece of information she could find about whoever had destroyed New Eden. Now, as she stood in the command center deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, she finally had answers. "Admiral, I know who killed our people," she said, her voice filled with quiet anger. "They call themselves the Kethar Dominion, but they have another name for themselves, the Purifiers." Admiral Han Solai looked up from the tactical screens she had been studying. "Tell me everything." Yunji activated a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of a distant part of the galaxy. Red dots marked the locations of Kethar worlds and fleets. They control 17 star systems and have colonies on 43 different planets. Their military has about 10,000 ships, which makes them one of the more powerful forces in this part of the galaxy. "What makes them think they can attack us?" Solai asked. "That's the truly disturbing part," Yunji replied, pulling up more files. "The Kethar don't see other species as equals. They believe that they are the only pure life form in the galaxy and that every other species is contaminating space just by existing. They think it's their religious duty to wipe out what they call inferior genetic material." Solai studied the information carefully. The Kethar were not just another aggressive alien species looking for resources or territory. They were fanatics who genuinely believed that genocide was a holy act. They had been systematically destroying smaller species for decades, always, choosing targets that couldn't fight back effectively. "They picked us because they thought we were weak," Solai said quietly. "Just another small species with a few colonies and no real military power." "Exactly," Yunji confirmed. "Based on what they could observe, humans appeared to have maybe 3,000 or 4,000 ships at most. To them, we looked like easy prey." From across the command center, Navigation Officer Jung Min Woo called out an update. "Admiral, I'm receiving status reports from all staging areas. Every single facility is now fully operational. We have 700,000 combat vessels ready for deployment across 47 different locations." Solai allowed herself a small smile. The Kethar had made the biggest mistake in their species' history. They had attacked humanity thinking they were hunting helpless prey, not knowing they had just awakened the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. Over the following days, the largest military mobilization in human history continued in complete secrecy. Ships that had been sleeping in hidden bases for decades were now emerging into space, their crews either coming out of long-term suspended animation or transferring from the small maintenance teams that had kept the vessels ready all these years. Each ship carried something special: memorial beacons containing the names, faces, and personal stories of every person who had died on New Eden. 2.5 million individual records, from newborn babies to elderly grandparents, all carefully preserved so that their sacrifice would be remembered during the coming battle. Captain Park Nari, who had been promoted after her service during the New Eden investigation, was now commanding one of the assault groups. As she walked through her ship's corridors, she could see her crew members checking and rechecking their equipment, Everyone knew what was coming and everyone was ready. "Captain," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving coded transmissions from Kethar space. They're not even trying to hide their plans." On the main screen, a translated Kethar broadcast appeared. The alien commander, a tall creature with sharp features and cold black eyes, was announcing their next targets to the entire galaxy. "The cleansing of the human contamination will continue," the Kethar leader declared. 3 more of their agricultural worlds have been selected for purification. We will erase them just as completely as we erased New Eden. This is our sacred duty. The broadcast listed the names of 3 human colonies: Haven's Rest, Golden Fields, and New Harmony. Each of these worlds was home to millions of peaceful farmers and their families. The Kethar were planning to murder them all, just as they had murdered the people of New Eden. Across the galaxy, other alien species watched. This broadcast with the same indifference they had shown when New Eden was destroyed. The Galactic Council held another meeting where various ambassadors made speeches about the tragedy of violence, but nobody suggested actually doing anything to stop the Kethar. Most aliens expected the same thing that had happened after New Eden. Humans would file official protests, make angry speeches, and maybe impose some trade restrictions. Then, after a few months, everyone would move on and pretend it had never happened. The Thaxian Collective even sent a message to human leadership suggesting that humanity should simply abandon those 3 colonies and relocate their populations to safer areas of space. "It is regrettable," their message said, "but sometimes smaller species must accept their limitations." What none of these aliens knew was that humanity's limitations were very different from what they imagined. While they were making their speeches and offering their useless sympathy, 700,000 human warships were moving through hyperspace toward Kethar territory. The journey would take several more days to complete. The human fleet was approaching from dozens of different directions, using routes that would bring them to Kethar space simultaneously. It was the most complex military operation in galactic history, involving more ships than most species even knew existed. Admiral Zali stood in her command center, watching as status reports came in from fleet commanders across human space. Every group was on schedule, every ship was ready, every crew member understood their mission. The Kethar Dominion thought they had sent humanity a message by destroying New Eden. They believed they had shown the galaxy that humans were weak and could be killed without consequences. They were about to receive humanity's reply, and when 700,000 human warships dropped out of hyperspace above Kethar worlds, the galaxy would finally understand what humans were truly capable of when someone threatened their families. At exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, Galactic Standard Time, the sky above every Kethar world suddenly filled with human warships. It happened all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch and made 700,000 vessels appear out of nowhere. On the Kethar homeworld, Admiral Zektar was drinking his morning meal when his communications officer burst into his private quarters, panic written across his alien features. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," the officer stammered. "Our sensors are detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system." Zektar followed him to the command center, expecting to see maybe a few hundred human ships seeking revenge for New Eden. What he saw instead made his blood run cold. The tactical display showed so many enemy contacts that they almost covered the entire screen. The computer kept adding more and more red dots as additional human ships continued dropping out of hyperspace. "How many vessels are we detecting?" Zektar asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, the count is still climbing. We're showing over 30,000 ships in our system alone, and we're receiving similar reports from all 17 of our star systems." Across all Kethar space, the same scene was playing out. Military commanders who had expected an easy victory against a few desperate human ships were staring at sensor readings that seemed impossible. Some thought their equipment was malfunctioning. Others wondered if they were having a nightmare. Then came the broadcast that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "This is Admiral Hans Solai of the Human Defense Fleet," the voice said, calmly on every communication frequency. The message was being transmitted simultaneously to every Kethar world, every space station, and every ship. "You destroyed one of our colonies, killing 2.5 million innocent people. This is our reply. The voice was completely calm, without any anger or emotion. Somehow that made it even more terrifying. Commander Lee Jae-sung stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as his battle group of 30,000 ships moved into attack formation around the Kethar homeworld. He had been planning this moment for weeks, studying every detail of Kethar military installations and defense systems. "All ships, this is Commander Lee," he announced to his fleet. "Remember, we are not here to become monsters like them. Military, targets only. Every civilian life we spare proves that we are better than the creatures who destroyed New Eden." The Kethar had built their homeworld's defenses around the assumption that they would never face more than a few thousand enemy ships at most. Their orbital weapons platforms and defensive fleets had been designed to handle typical galactic conflicts, not an assault by the largest military force in known history. "Sir, enemy fleet is moving to intercept," reported Weapons Officer Bae Soo-jin from her station on the bridge of the Eternal Vengeance. "They have approximately 400 ships defending the homeworld." Lee Jae-sung did some quick math in his head. 30,000 human ships against 400 Kethar vessels. The aliens were outnumbered more than 70 to 1. "Begin." "The attack," he ordered. What followed could barely be called a battle. The Kethar ships, brave as they were, simply had no chance against such overwhelming numbers. Human vessels swarmed around each enemy ship like angry bees, targeting weapon systems and engines with precision strikes. Within minutes, the entire Kethar defense fleet was either destroyed or helplessly drifting in space. "Sir, their capital ships are breaking formation," Soo-jin reported. "It looks like they're trying to run away." Lee Jae-sung watched as the largest Kethar vessels turned away from the fight and began accelerating toward the edge of the star system. Part of him wanted to pursue them and finish the job, but he had his orders. "Let them flee," he said calmly. "Make sure they get a good look at what's happening to their military bases as they run. I want them to remember this day for the rest of their lives." Across the Kethar homeworld, human ships were systematically destroying every military installation they could find. Weapons factories exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Training academies where young Kethar had learned to hate other species were reduced to rubble. Naval shipyards that had built the vessels used to destroy New Eden were turned into twisted metal. But throughout the assault, not a single civilian building was touched. Human commanders had strict orders to avoid any target that might contain non-military personnel. Schools, hospitals, residential areas, and civilian spaceports were completely ignored. The same precise destruction was happening throughout Kethar space. On every world they controlled, human fleets were dismantling their ability to wage war while carefully protecting innocent lives. It was a demonstration of both overwhelming power and remarkable restraint. The assault lasted exactly 6 hours. When it was over, the Kethar Dominion still existed as a political entity, but their military had been completely eliminated. Every warship had been destroyed or disabled. Every weapons facility had been reduced to scrap metal. Every military base had been turned into a smoking crater. The species that had called themselves purifiers no longer had the ability to purify anyone. Their holy mission to cleanse the galaxy had ended in the most complete military defeat in recorded history. As the human fleets began withdrawing to safe distances, Admiral Solly sent one final message to the surviving Kethar leadership. "Your military forces have been eliminated," she announced. "Your ability to threaten innocent people has been permanently removed. The people of New Eden have been avenged." She paused for a moment, then continued in the same calm, emotionless voice. "If any of your survivors ever again consider attacking human civilians, remember this day. Remember that we showed you mercy when we could have shown you the same fate. You gave to New Eden. Remember that humanity's preference for peace should never be mistaken for weakness." The broadcast ended, and across Kethar space, millions of aliens sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened to them. The predators had become prey, and they would never be the same again. The surrender message came faster than anyone expected. Just 4 hours after the human fleet had finished dismantling their military, Kethar commanders across all 17 star systems began broadcasting the same desperate plea on every available frequency. "This is High Commander Velkoth of the Kethar Dominion. the message began, the alien's voice shaking with fear and disbelief. "We formally surrender all military operations and submit to human authority. We beg for mercy and promise never again to threaten any human world." Similar messages were coming from Keithar leaders throughout their territory. Many of them were openly weeping as they spoke, their voices breaking as they tried to comprehend what had just happened to their supposedly invincible military. The species that had spent decades calling themselves the galaxy's ultimate predators now understood they had made a terrible mistake. Admiral Han Solai received these surrender messages aboard her flagship as the human fleet began its withdrawal from Keithar space. She felt no satisfaction in their defeat, only a grim sense that justice had finally been served for the innocent people of New Eden. 3 weeks later, Solai found herself standing in the most important building in the galaxy, the Grand Assembly, Hall of the Galactic Council. Representatives from over 60 different alien species sat in curved rows of seats that rose up like a giant amphitheater. The hall was designed to make speakers feel small and insignificant, but today Solai felt anything but small. The silence in the chamber was complete. Nobody whispered to their neighbors. Nobody shuffled papers or checked their electronic devices. Every single alien representative was staring at the holographic displays that filled the center of the hall, showing the true size of humanity's military fleet. 700,000 ships. The numbers seemed impossible, even when displayed. Right in front of them. "Honored representatives," Solai began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the massive hall. "I stand before you today not as a conqueror, but as a defender of innocent life. 3 weeks ago, the Keithar Dominion chose to murder 2.5 million human civilians on New Eden Colony. Today I want to make sure that nothing like that ever happens again." She gestured toward the holographic fleet display. "We are a peaceful species. We prefer to solve problems through negotiation rather than warfare. We would rather cooperate with our neighbors than conquer them. But please do not make the mistake of thinking that our preference for peace means we are unable to defend ourselves." In the front row of the assembly, the Zalarian ambassador was visibly shaking. This was the same alien who had dismissed human complaints about New Eden just a month ago, suggesting that humans should simply accept their losses and move on. Now he looked terrified. "Admiral," the Zalarian said, his voice barely above a whisper, "how long has humanity possessed such a massive fleet? Our intelligence services never detected anything like this." Solai looked directly at him as she answered, 200 years, Ambassador. We began building these ships shortly after we first encountered other species in the galaxy. We learned very quickly that the universe contains those who mistake kindness for weakness. We decided it would be wise to be prepared for the day someone made that mistake about us." A murmur ran through the assembly hall as the full implications of her words sank in. For 2 centuries, while aliens had been dismissing humans as a minor species with limited military power, humanity had been secretly building the largest fleet in galactic history. Captain Park Nari, who had been promoted to admiral after her service during the New Eden investigation, stepped forward to deliver the final part of humanity's message to the galaxy. "The 2.5 million innocent people who died on New Eden have been answered," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "Their deaths have been avenged, and their killers have been stopped from ever harming anyone else. Let this be remembered by any species that might consider attacking human civilians in the future." She paused and looked around the hall, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of different worlds. "We do not seek to rule over other species. We do not want to conquer your worlds or control your governments. All we ask is that you treat human lives with the same respect we show to yours. If you can do that, you will find no better friends in the galaxy. But if you choose to harm our people, you will discover exactly what humans are capable of when our families are threatened." Over the following months, as humanity's massive fleet returned to its hidden bases throughout human space, the galaxy underwent a fundamental change in how it viewed the human species. The quiet neighbors who had been known for sharing medical advances and agricultural techniques were now understood to possess the military power to reshape galactic civilization. Trade agreements that had been unfavorable to humans were quickly renegotiated. Territorial disputes that had dragged on for years were suddenly resolved in humanity's favor. Species that had previously ignored human diplomatic requests now responded immediately and respectfully. The Kethar survivors, their military completely destroyed, and their government under human supervision, were relocated to closely monitored worlds where they could no longer threaten anyone. Their children grew up learning a very different lesson than their parents had taught, that some species who appear to be easy prey are actually the most dangerous predators of all. Humanity resumed its peaceful expansion across the galaxy, continuing to build new colonies and establish trade relationships with other species. But now everyone understood the truth behind an ancient human saying that became famous throughout the galaxy. Speak softly, but carry a big stick. The humans had been speaking softly for 200 years. Now the galaxy had finally seen the stick they had been carrying all along, and nobody would ever make the mistake of thinking humans were weak again.